world. This theme resonates quite well with WaterAble, as we very much encourage and have the message to encourage our industry to think about this inclusion of people with a disability as we return to our workplaces, and the need for flexible working arrangements for those people that require them. So you may also have heard or been made aware of WaterAble Connections program. We are launching this program, launching round 2 of this program, and expressing the interest today. I will be speaking further during this event about our launch of round 2 of the Connections program and how you can get involved in this fantastic program. So just to reiterate the purpose of today, the purpose of today is to celebrate International Day for People with Disabilities. It's also got our a theme of cultural awareness and reflections about people with a disability and First Nations people. So what I'll do now, I'll introduce our guest speaker. So we are very excited to have Jody with us today. Jody Barney is a Buri-Gubba Orangutan deaf woman from Queensland. She uses Auslan and is a leading Aboriginal disability cultural trainer and consultant. She has worked for over 30 years in the disability space across Australia and also internationally. So please join me in welcoming Jody, and I will pass over to Jody right now to do her presentation. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you all for inviting me today. I just wanted to ensure I could see the interpreter on screen and he can see me. Wonderful. So thank you for the wonderful invitation and the introduction. I appreciate that, Donald. And as part of my cultural responsibility, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where I am currently, and I'm currently on Waka Waka land. And you may be curious as to where that is. So that's up around Kingaroy here in Queensland. So I'm here in Queensland for many reasons, but today is a wonderful time for me to celebrate International Day of Persons with Disabilities, because I've currently been visiting my elderly father, who is a senior man, and it's been important to have conversations about what's happening in this space and persons with disabilities within our community. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be watching and in attendance today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging as well. I'd like to thank Llewellyn for inviting me along today to speak. I know that Llewellyn's been working tirelessly to get this event organised today, because it's such a wonderful theme, International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and it's a huge theme, in fact, looking at leadership, participation and a number of themes across the spectrum. So it's such an honour to be here. Thank you. What's important, if we think about accessibility and sustainability in terms of what's happening within our communities now and into the future and post-COVID, throughout this pandemic environment, it's had a huge impact on our First Nations people, not only here in Australia, but also globally. I'm a proud Buri-Gubba Orangutan woman, which means I'm also a saltwater woman from the coast of Queensland. But having said that, I usually live down in Victoria on the Goulburn Murray River in Shepparton. And I am familiar with the wonderful work that's been happening with the First Nations people taking care of our waterways and our water systems and looking at how we can ensure a sustainable environment that's culturally appropriate, supporting the waterways of our nation and the various lands that form part of it. So an essential part is our waterways. I'm very excited to read the Aboriginal Water Program, the nurturing that's occurring to land, the waters and the community program that exists, and also ensuring that our First Nations people have that connection with the sustainability, looking at the cultural, economic and customary aspects, and also spiritual aspects that form part of this. So the theme today with International Day of Persons with Disabilities is really all about how we respect diversity and intersectionality. And what does that actually mean for the future, not only for people who are working in the water industry, but also their communities and families, just to ensure that we do have sustainable options and relationships with First Nations people with disabilities in community. And as we are aware culturally, we're natural nurturers of the land, and we need to ensure that we do have oversight and look after our precious waterways, the lands, and our precious environment. And that's been our history and our home and part of our wisdom and knowledge for thousands of years, and how we've been the custodians. And it's critical that we do continually have relationships with people who work in these areas. It's also important for us to see what the First Nations peoples with disabilities are doing, the work that they're doing in these areas, and have an eagerness about the environmental sustainability aspect and their involvement with participation, and what we need to do to ensure that people in our communities do have a voice in this workspace. So how do we sustain that? Really, it's through relationships. How do we have relationships? Often when I talk to people, they're very keen to talk about relationships, but often they don't seek out partnerships, and partnerships often are only short term, if you like. Whereas if we look at our critical goal being overall relationships, that means that we're able to ensure that we do have equity, respect, and better clear intent. And we also know our boundaries as part of that. So we're familiar with the workspaces having policies, procedures, various practices that are adhered to. And there are reports written about this type of thing, what's expected in the workplace. And that's a key part of various organisations, ensuring that people with disabilities are involved, they are employed, but also have opportunities for advancement and also career progression. So similar to First Nations people, they should have this opportunity as well. Because if we are keen to see participation in employment from a First Nations disabled person's perspective, they need to understand themselves how they can engage with country. And our investment on country, as I mentioned before, goes back thousands of years. We've learnt that all through our childhoods. And that's absolutely critical. So if we're not engaged or not forming relationships, it means we feel marginalised, and we need to understand our roles in terms of how we can better participate and engage. And we can do that with various allies that exist in the community and also industry bodies. So it is critical that we do establish better sustainable relationships in order for this to happen into the future. And that starts off with the yarning, having a yarn, a talk, everyday conversations around what are we eager to see happen? What are our common goals? What would people like to be involved in? And I do know that many people in our communities often talk about fire management, water management, and the like, And really, those programs are critical, but where I see the link there is of Indigenous people working on country within the waterways to ensure that those conversations are taking place in terms of protection and cultural authority over the knowledge and wisdom that's passed down on the waterways. But also, what does that mean for us in terms of sustainable relationships and sustainable knowledge, and how we can better work with one another? And we do know often when we're working with First Nations people, particularly with disabilities, that doesn't happen particularly often. So people do find it difficult to locate individuals with disability within the First Nations cohort. So it's important that we do have that wisdom and knowledge there to be able to engage with those individuals and understand what's happening in those local communities and in relation to the waterways. And because of our responsibilities on country, that also includes what we do with the water and ensuring that we engage, we invite the most appropriate people to work side by side with, and that our traditional responsibilities as custodians of the land, looking at senior men and women and elders, to ensure that those cohorts are involved, and then in the future we always ensure that those individuals are part of this process. And the diversity of the community needs to be reflected, not only those who do have the capacity to do the work, but also other individuals who do live, work and experience and connect to country. And I'd love to see how we can improve this, particularly with those who have disabilities in our community. And I know for myself, coming from the Shepparton area, I've already had conversations with people about how the organisations include persons with disabilities in the waterways programs, because as we know, Shepparton has a huge water responsibility for the entire community, not just Shepparton, but also throughout various regions. So what does that actually mean in terms of engaging and connection? And persons from disabilities within our communities are very keen to have a voice and have a say at the table. And they're eager to have employment opportunities and work on country, providing that custodianship, if you like, knowledge and awareness in order to establish sustainable practices and a long-term relationship, working side by side respectfully, valuing one another, and also demonstrating integrity and, importantly, intent. So really, for me, working with community, how do we ensure as a person I can provide the best possible access? In terms of inclusion, individuals who have disabilities from our communities, looking at cultural training that we provide and various support programs. We do know that cultural safety training, cultural awareness, those types of practices can be flexible and they can be tailor-made. And it's critical we see how that works with individuals on a needs per basis, but also with WaterAble. I'd love to be involved because historically I've not heard of the organisation, and I was amazed at what potential opportunities could be there for First Nations people who are keen on the employment space, working there side by side, naturally with the appropriate supports when working in the water industry. We also know that throughout Victoria, it's a huge space. We have a huge responsibility not only to look after our waterways around the Shepparton region, but also form those connections with various other regions throughout the state. And that also means establishing collaboration, better access to the water experience, and those relationships for individuals who are working in the water industry and space. Part of our values is, through this system and processes, finding elders in the community who can provide us with the knowledge and wisdom. And if we feel as though we're uncertain at any point in time, being able to call upon them. And what's an important part of our participation in the employment space, particularly in relation to WaterAble support, is persons with disabilities not only engaging, but also I think it's a wonderful opportunity there to make decisions around what WaterAble can do to support First Nations people with disabilities in this space. Part of my role really in community historically has been listening not only to those with disabilities, but also other various cohorts that exist that will have an impact on our people. And this year's theme, International Day of Persons with Disabilities, is a huge topic because we're talking about the post-COVID era, the post-COVID world. What does this mean for us in terms of employment? But also many people also thinking about different ways of working in order to survive and how this has had an impact on people's employment and what are their values and what do they relate to. And if the status quo continues in terms of employment or other opportunities, people lose interest. So they need to better engage to ensure that we have sustainable relationships to continue with country. And we know with COVID, it's had an impact on every single one of us, not just during lockdowns, but also how it's had implications on our life experience on country, not having access to being able to visit country in the physical space, the nurturing of country, working with individuals who are looking after country. And we do know that in this past year, it has been a struggle and we will continue to have ongoing issues with water security. And the importance for us is looking at those people who do work in industry and ensuring that they're fully supportive of this process. I think it's extremely worthwhile having this conversation with people in industry to ensure that we have an open relationship that's transparent with the community in order to establish advisory groups, to be able to have conversations about the impacts of what is happening in the work, in the various water boards that exist throughout the state of Victoria. And we do know without water that we will have a crisis, and often that's the case. I know for myself recently in the Northern Territory, where I purchased water to be brought in to a remote community where none existed, the importance of what that means and the richness of how communication, engagement in the community needs to happen, and people need to be aware and understand that water security is vital. With employment, we also know that if people with a disability have knowledge and awareness about academic opportunities, training, education, literacy skills, they need to gain that before they have experience in the workplace, similar to Indigenous people without disabilities. But also having other rich knowledge and awareness that's based from their own lived experience on country. So not only living on country, but also their intuition and their understanding of what's important in this space and how to have honest conversations that can be quite robust. And that's fine, because I think it's a valued conversation, even if people don't necessarily always agree, but we need to ensure that we do provide the best possible access for water security throughout the state of Victoria for the Victorian people, but also ensure that we do have representation across the board in terms of disability across all cohorts in the industry. And I think this is a perfect example of where International Day of People with Disabilities sees in the post-COVID pandemic that we look at sustainability, inclusion, creating accessible environments and relationships for all people to ensure that we do have fair and equitable processes and shared relationships that are respectful for the sustainable future for all people in Victoria and in Australia. I think I might leave that there for now. I'm not sure of the time, but if anybody does have any questions at any point in time, I'm certainly happy to respond. And I do hope that it was a valuable presentation for you all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Jody. That was a very moving presentation. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. So now we're going to do a little Q&A session. So this is going to be moderated by Lindsay Brown, a member of an employee of GHD and also a very amazing member of our WaterAble organising committee. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Donald, and thank you so much, Jody, for that amazing presentation. It was fantastic to hear from you, and I think you've given us all a lot to think about. I do have a few questions, and I'm sure we'll be getting more from the audience coming through in the Q&A, so don't hold back, everybody. Get really engaged. But as a moderator, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the first question of my own. One of the things, and this is, I guess, to both Donald and Jody, if either of you want to respond, it'd be great to hear your views. One of the things that you mentioned, Jody, in your talk was really this intersectionality question, which is something that we talk a lot about in WaterAble. And I was curious to know how you find that changes the conversation around diversity and inclusion.
That's a great question. Thank you, Lindsay. I guess with that question, often people think about intersectionality and what does it actually mean for us in terms of diversity and inclusion. So when we're looking at intersectionality, we're acknowledging people who have the wisdom, the knowledge, and also the skill sets required, the capacity and the history. But also intersectionality doesn't identify the person directly. So I can't separate myself out into several pieces or components. So like a person with a disability, often people just focus on the disability or they focus on women's issues or Indigenous issues, which is not the case. So as a complete person, I have all those various aspects that form part of me. And that's what you get. So you can't separate those aspects out. And I think it's important that with the journey, we support individuals in terms of enhancing people's capacity because of the knowledge, the wisdom, the cultural aspect that they hold, but their lived experiences, because we all know that intersectionality means that we can create positive outcomes only when we have inclusion and participation.
I have another question around employment. I recently learned that the employment numbers for people with a disability have not changed in about 30 years. And was absolutely staggered to learn that. I'd be curious to know, Donald and Jody, your reflections on whether or not COVID and our kind of world post-pandemic presents a unique opportunity to move those numbers forward finally, and what you think that could look like. Maybe Donald, do you want to start?
Yes, sure. So for me, I think the COVID pandemic has encouraged people with a disability to become actively employed, but also given them the opportunities to not necessarily have to go to a workplace. They can do work from home, and that creates comfort for those people and also their employers as well, because the employers then getting the best out of the employee. And then also again, making sure that, the people with a disability have a place in life and they want to be involved. And to me, the pandemic or the COVID pandemic has embraced that in some respects. It has showed that us as an organisation, as an industry in Victoria, have adapted to the different ways of working, and also acknowledged that there's people out there that may not be able to attend a workplace 5 days a week or whatever the situation may be, but also that can actively contribute and do an amazing job.
Jody, do you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree with that comment, Donald, not only for myself, but also other people in the community who are working from home. And that's been a wonderful positive outcome during COVID. So somebody like myself, for example, I worked last year, and it was probably the most productive year of my working life. It was incredible working from home. So I was trying to work out why that was. And I think what I discovered for myself really was thinking about my abilities, working online in terms of online opportunities, and having more access to Auslan interpreters, attending conferences or meetings, and saving on travel costs. So not only not needing to travel, which is a huge issue for people with disabilities, and also organisations who won't necessarily pay for myself or an interpreter to travel to a particular venue because their budgets are limited. And this has enabled me the time and the space to work with organisations, my clients, to access information in community, but also think about the positive outcome of COVID and what does it mean for other people in community who have similar experiences in terms of barriers, and where they can really feel more comfortable in a safe space, in a safe environment, working from home, and knowing that if they need to have breaks, that's absolutely fine. They can do that. They can turn their camera off and walk away and have a break. So their home is naturally more accessible to them. Whereas when they often go to a building or a public space, it's not necessarily the case. And that's critical because, you know, the individual is aware of their own OH&S issues, how they can work better and more productively at home, have time out when they require, and that's different for every one of us. So I guess I'm keen on those learnings and changing my approaches and ways of working because of that experience. And I am out travelling at the moment, but that being said, I still have access to community through Zoom, online forums such as what we're doing here today. So there are wonderful opportunities to engage through Zoom and these types of platforms. So it has been a wonderful outcome, but I have to say a lot of First Nations people with disabilities don't necessarily have access to the digital environment and have they experience digital poverty. So we need to be mindful of that and respect that fact, and think about how we can encourage people to come on board. And we talked about the numbers of people with disabilities over the last 30 years, and people saying that those numbers have been the same. And as we know, I've been around for a very long time and thinking about those diverse cohorts, and I've seen innovative ways to engage people with disability, and often organisations and services, especially through this experience with COVID related practices, thinking, okay, now it's appropriate for people to work from home, so that it creates employment opportunities for those with disabilities. So it means that with the virtual office space, these types of scenarios hopefully mean there'll be improved and increased numbers of persons with disabilities who are employed because they can work from home with this technology. And we've already proven through the last 2 years that this can actually happen. So it is great to know that that's been a positive outcome of this landscape, and potentially laying the foundations for the future, being more inclusive and accessible.
I think that's definitely what everybody in this call is interested in and wants to play a part in achieving. I'll take a question from the audience specifically about that, around how can, I guess, what advice do you have for the people in the audience who want to be better allies to First Nations people and people with a disability? How can they play that role in the best possible way? I'd love to hear from both of you about that. I'm sure that's what everyone's dying to know.
So Jody can go.
Oh no, go for it, Donald.
Yeah, so my reflection on that would be, you know, I think as an industry we're improving in our inclusion and our perception of inclusion, and I think we're now looking at the whole picture of inclusion. Okay, so particularly disability, but making sure we are actually including everyone within that situation that may have a disability, whether it be visible, whether it be physical, whether it be temporary or permanent, just whatever the case may be. And I think we're actually investigating different types of ways that we can be flexible for those types of people to be within our industry and include them. Because at the end of the day, including them is the best thing we can do. Over to you, John.
Definitely. I think from a First Nations disabled person's perspective, as a person who thinks collectively, we don't think individually. So part of my relationships that I form are to establish, first of all, allies, and that naturally has to include community. So I've often asked people that if you'd like to get participation happening, celebrate cultural festivals, events, and so forth, contact your local community elders, first of all, and find out when those events or opportunities can potentially occur, and also who are the most appropriate people to have those conversations with. So if you establish working relationships, what's your intent behind it? And what's the relationship intent? Because working is different from community participation, and it's important we understand that distinction. So looking at the relationships that are based on capacity or ability, we need to engage from those community relationships and those working or employment relationships and tie those two together. So in conversations with elders from the community, it's important to find out who's the most appropriate person that's invited from community, but also given opportunities to perhaps for they themselves to organise it or do an acknowledgement, welcome to country, and that's a little bit different. So with participation with individuals who are disabled from community, if they see this happening, then more of them will be eager to participate. So similar to First Nations people, seeing other First Nations people be a voice and then they will follow. It's not always the case that people will volunteer immediately. They need to observe this space, feel safe, and also they're often reading the intent. What's the purpose of the organisation or the people creating this? What value do you bring to me as a person who is a First Nations people who's just disabled? So, and they can bring a level of richness into that space. So it's important that when you're establishing allies, you have open communication about those relationships, open and honest communication about what you know and what you don't know. And it's absolutely fine to admit ignorance if you're not aware of certain issues. And, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily know about Indigenous culture or history. So it's important that you have those conversations, you're open and you're honest. And that way you have a two-way conversation and both those parties are able to engage and learn from one another. And it's difficult to engage and have those conversations if I'm not willing to participate or I don't feel valued, first of all. So it has to be a two-way street, if you like.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jody. I have to say from my own reflections, being part of WaterAble has definitely opened my eyes to lots of things I didn't know. So I think that's those relationships definitely are valuable both ways. I'm being prompted to wrap up the Q&A, I'm afraid, but I'm gonna try to sneak in one last question from the audience. Sorry to our producers. Somebody wanted to know, as an employer, what are the important things, maybe just the one most important thing for the sake of time, to attract and retain people with disabilities now in a COVID world, especially given the emphasis that you both place on employment?
For me, thinking about that question, I think number one is my main piece of advice would be to know the types of people that you're wanting to attract and also working out, are they a fit for the organisation? And I guess you can always meet a target of certain cohorts, but you need to be a valuable employer only if the person feels comfortable in that space. So looking at who is the right fit and what can you do to make that happen. So that for me is important, and that's probably going to achieve the best outcome for all, because finding the right person for the role who has the same knowledge and richness and capacity to be willing to learn, but also provide information to you as an employer. So it needs to be, I guess I would be saying it needs to be an equal relationship.
Great, thank you. And a quick one from you, Donald. Most important thing to attract and retain people with disabilities?
Yep. Very, very similar. So it is about making sure the person is the right fit for the job or the task, the position, and making sure that you can engage with them up front with what their needs are going to be and whether or not they need it, and adapt to those needs to make sure that their working life is the best that it can be.
Great. All right, well, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you both so much. And over to you, Donald, to take us into the next part of the program.
So thank you very much, Jody, and also those who asked the questions of today. It's been very fantastic to hear everyone's conversations and their questions and be able to answer them as best we can. So now we're going to launch, I'm going to launch our round 2 of our Connections program. So our Connections program is around, we pair leaders with employees with a disability across the water industry to network and share insights. And this program runs for 6 months. So we will be opening the expression of interest today, and they will close on the 31st of January. And then in February 2022, we will then be contacting the pairs and pairing them up and to start the conversations and information sharing. So right now, what I'm going to do is we're going to play a video, a short 4-minute video from 2 participants from round 1. So Heidi Biggin and Dan Barnett. So I'd like to play the video now.
My name is Heidi Biggin and I work at Central Highlands Water in Ballarat in the People, Culture and Safety team. I've worked at Central Highlands Water for the last 10 years now, and I am a person with a disability. I am legally blind and I lost my eyesight 11 years ago. I have a beautiful guide dog, Freya, that helps me get around everywhere. And I also use a light cane. Why did I join the Connections program? First and foremost, I was just curious when anything comes up in the water industry around disability or advocacy or diversity and inclusion, it always piques my interest, being a person with a disability. So I was curious. And then when I learned that it was a joint mentoring program, you see sometimes in the industry, it's always the mentor being a senior person, a leader within the business. It's not necessarily both ways. So it was really great that I could be Dean's mentor and he could be mine. It was an equal partnership. He would learn about me living with a disability and I'd learn off him being a leader in the water industry.
G'day, my name's Dean, and thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about the WaterAble Connections program. So why did I sign up? To be quite honest, I wasn't really sure what I was going to get into, but one thing I did know is that I was going to develop a new connection with someone from the water industry. Secondly, I thought I would develop a broader perspective about different abilities. And last of all, I was really hoping that I could contribute something to this wonderful program. So Heidi and I are roughly 6 months into the program now, and I guess what sort of feedback can I provide? Well, both chatters, so there's no issue with filling in hours worth of discussion. So we catch up for roughly an hour each month. We talk about strategizing, goal setting, whether it's in the workplace or even home life. And I guess from a personal point of view, what am I getting out of this? Learnings, a increased emotional intelligence, a broader perspective, and most of all, a new water industry buddy. So it's been a fantastic opportunity, and I hope I'm able to give back as much as I'm getting out of the program.
It's great that we can choose our own path. So Dean and I choose to catch up once a month for 1 hour. We always go over time. We're big talkers. We sometimes have structure, but we never stick to it. And we just let the conversation flow naturally. We share what we're working on at the moment, obstacles we face, different ways we work around things. We give each other advice, and it's a really equal partnership where we both feel valued, we both feel heard. It's great to share my insights with working in an office in the water industry. I've always felt like I've been valued and I have something to offer, that you can have a disability and be an asset to a business. So it's great to share with him my insights and my lived experience. I've had 10 years lived experience and lots of examples to share. So that's been great. Would I recommend the Connections program? Absolutely. You have nothing to lose. And if you don't like it or you're not finding it helpful, you just stop your catch-ups. It's very much self-led. So I would say absolutely dive in, whether you're a leader in the water industry or whether you're a person with a disability. I would definitely recommend to reach out. You've got nothing to lose, everything to gain. I found a new friend within the water industry, a new connection, and that's been fantastic.
What would I say to those people that are considering being a part of the program? So give it a go. I think you'll be quietly surprised. From my point of view, I want to continue on. I think it's fantastic, and I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
Wow, wasn't that a great video? Thank you, Dean and Heidi, for providing your insights into the Connections program round one. For me, it's a great privilege to hear your insights. Gives me the opportunity to reflect on what WaterAble are doing and seeing how it is affecting the water industry across Victoria and how people are engaged and enjoying what we are providing them, which is fantastic. So if you'd like to register for round two of the WaterAble Connections program, you can go to our website, which is www.waterable.com.au, or you could also just reach out to us via our social media platforms, which are LinkedIn, Twitter, and also Facebook. Okay, so just in wrapping up, I know we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but hopefully that means I can put some time back in your day and you can enjoy your day going forward. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Jody Barney. Jody, having you join us today has been absolutely fantastic, and it is certainly something that I have taken great insights out of, and hopefully I'll be able to embed those insights into myself as well to improve myself, but also help improve the water industry within Victoria. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining us today and participating with asking questions. If today is the only celebration event you're attending today, thank you for choosing us. But then also, if you are attending other events, which, let's hope you do, embrace this occasion. It only happens once a year, and it's a fantastic occasion to celebrate and get involved in. Thank you to our GHD sponsors. You guys have been absolutely fantastic with sponsoring this event and also doing the background technology work. So thank you to the production team and the rest of GHD in general. Last but not least, I'd just like to thank the whole WaterAble membership, but also the WaterAble organising committee. So on the organising committee, we've got Llewellyn Prain, who is my deputy. We've got Joe Lim, and we've got Lindsay Brown, who you saw earlier, and also Matt Iverson. I really want to take the time to thank you guys, because without you guys, this event wouldn't have gone ahead. You have done an incredible job with organising all the logistics and all those kind of things, and making my job a whole lot easier, making sure, you know, I've got everything in place for what I have to do today, and I was all organised. So thank you very much. So what I'll do now is thank Gareth again, Gareth Huggett, for providing the music today, which is fantastic. Really well done, Gareth. Thank you very much. And so thank you again, everyone. Today we're going to wrap up with another song from Gareth, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
The night has come, the land is dark, and the moon is the only light you can see. No one be afraid, I won't be afraid, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. In the sky, there will fall, tremble and fall, and the mountain will crumble to the sea. I will cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Stand by me. If the sky that we look upon tumble and fall, and we tumble to the sea, I will cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Whenever you're in trouble, stand by me. Stand by me. Oh, stand now. Stand by me. Thanks, everybody.